My name is Andy Jasper. I'm the director of the National Tropical Botanical Gardens South Shore Gardens on the island, the beautiful island of Kauai. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce the next speaker. He, with Gaynor Coley, who you'll meet later, used to be my mega boss. And I worked for them for 13 years at the Eden Project, in this wonderful botanical garden in Cornwall in England. This guy dared to dream. He convinced the nation to believe that the impossible was possible. He had this crazy idea to take this disused open-cast mine, this great scar on the landscape, and in one of the most deprived regions of Europe, it's the 15th most deprived region of Europe, and build something that had never been seen in the world before. He created arguably the most dynamic and engaging botanical experience in the world. Although it is like a botanic garden because it has a collection of plants, none of those plants are rare, or very few of them are rare. These are the plants that we rely on in our everyday life. It's the rubber on the soles of your shoes, it's the cotton in your clothes, it's the food we eat, it's the medicine that we take. It's all of those things that we forget how inextricably connected we are to the natural world through trade decisions. His background is anthropology, archaeology, music, and garden restoration. It's a crazy influence. He brought rock and roll to horticulture, mixing art with science to create the most unashamed assault of the senses that you're ever likely to see. What this did was engaged audiences who rarely engaged with botanical experiences. Rarely you see these audiences in the garden. Over 16 million visitors since 2001 have visited the Eden Project. It's one of the most visited admission-charging attractions in the whole of the UK. Visitors share in a celebration of life at the Eden Project, and they engage with issues like food security and energy and biodiversity, habitat loss, restoration of ecology, local food, beer, champagne, poverty, child labor, cars, mass consumption. All these issues are part of our everyday life. I was talking to Ian Prance just earlier. In my mind, it's all to do with economics. We've touched on these subjects so many times. He created over 500 full-time equivalent jobs, supported over 3,000 jobs in this area of England that is hugely deprived. The project stands on its own 2 feet financially. It doesn't receive any government funding. No public funds go into the running of this botanical garden. So it's financially sustainable, arguably, and has become one of the world-renowned economic dynamos for its ability to generate or regenerate a region. It's the equivalent of over $2 billion have been pulled into a region with, which I've already described, very, very deprived. So Tim was knighted by the Queen of England in 2011 for daring to dream, for having the courage to create one of the most incredible, inspiring, meaning-making machines in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Tim Smit.
Hello, everybody. I can see that you're not obedient. I was hoping you'd all be up front. First of all, I'd like you to accept my apology and forgive me before I even start speaking, because I view my role today as being like Mephisto, to say the unsayable, but in front of friends so that we can all forget I said it, but to make an argument. Will you forgive me? Okay. So before I start speaking, I would like you to imagine we are all at Grand Central Station in New York, all of us. And just look up for a moment and imagine coming out of your forehead is some fishing line, and it sticks to the ceiling. I snap my fingers, and there is Michelangelo. And the ceiling is plastered over. This enormous ceiling is plastered over. And every descendant of any of you in this room is now painted on that ceiling 100 years from now. And they are looking down on us. And they have one moment in which they can be brought to life and speak to us, those living now. Imagine what they might say. What might they ask of us? You see, one of the things that tortures me is the sense that, did the people who were alive in the Renaissance know they were starting the Renaissance? Did they know it? Or were they a bunch of people like us, just trying to keep a roof over their heads and, hey, that's a cool invention, and that sort of stuff. Or are we at a moment where we are about to prove that the name that we gave to ourselves, Homo sapiens sapiens, so cool we named ourselves twice, is actually one of the greatest jokes ever told? Have we got inside ourselves the will, the fortitude, the bravery, the inspiration to actually imagine a world 100 years hence and the steps we might need to take in order to get ourselves, not with a prescriptive, you must do this, 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 and this. History shows that that is a failed approach, but to create an attitude, a mood, an openness to change, which I will talk about in a moment, that enables us to really affect the changes that many of us know in our heart are necessary, and many of us in our hearts hate ourselves for the cowardice we have in our souls, for not daring to say some of the things. You see, one of the problems that happens when you become a member of the establishment is that you get fear. Especially the men amongst us get fear. You get fear at the notion that you might say the unsayable because you mean it, you think it, you believe it, but the establishment might throw you out. You might be seen to be a bit of a maverick. Not one of us. How sinister is that, if that one of us that you somehow vainly want to belong to are the very forces which are going to take us onto the rocks of destruction? Adam de Botton, the famous philosopher, wrote something which I will paraphrase because I can't do it credit really, but what he said was, for 1.5 million years, humankind was in awe of the power of nature. The rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, and the fears of the night and of the unknown were truly terrible. Nature had to be worshipped. It had to be kept calm and at peace. For everywhere we looked, there was fear on the land. Until, in the late 1600s, something terrible, truly terrible happened. Humankind fell in love with itself. We fell in awe of ourselves, at our majesty, our magic, the ability we had to invent glorious things with the power of steam, the invention of electricity, and here in the beautiful country we're in was absolutely the engine room of those changes. And there we are today, still narcissistically looking into that mirror, adoring ourselves. Aren't we so clever? Maybe we are. But what of nature? As Adam de Botton says, how ironic that the way we look at nature is with the pity reserved for some creature washed up, battered and bruised on the shore of our lives. Is not the great effort we need to be creating to be about rediscovering awe and humility in the face of nature and recognizing that the most important thing we can do, and why we are all here, is to see whether we can snatch back some of those ideas that others have stolen from us in the room. Let us start with a word, culture, the Latin, to cultivate. Our profession, ladies and gentlemen, started civilization. All civilization began through culture, which became horticulture. So why do we behave like sniveling wretches? Oh, we're just botanists, just plant scientists. Please, sir, give me some money. I've got another scheme. We can save some plants. We know stuff that if the whole world's IT industry were to close down, there'd be a few job losses. If you guys disappeared off the face of the world, billions of people might die. Where is the courage to say that sort of thing? We shouldn't be sniveling wretches. We should be saying, if things are going wrong and the natural world is getting trashed, we're going to hold you to account. You to account, because we are trying to do those things. But if we're going to be able to do those things, we need to have a narrative, a story that is compelling. And actually, the story which says, oh, we just got to save stuff, we got to conserve it, preserve it, screams at me like the death throes of a conservatism which actually does not have the confidence to actually grab the real issues. How often have you read words like, we're going to build a center of excellence, we're going to think out of the box, we're going to be leading edge, bleeding edge, cutting edge, we're going to think out of the ether, and then we're going to think the unthinkable. Time after time, the tired cliches of the language that we use distances us more and more from the audience we want to reach. And then we tell lies about our profession, about our outreach and education, when actually almost everything that is done in almost every botanic garden in the world is second-rate and mediocre when it comes to education. It's basically the language of middle-aged men trying to communicate in motherhood and apple pie and thinking that schools and children, if you use it, people will love you. Please like us, we do education. Let me tell you, if we were as good as we say in many of the reports that we write, if we were that damn good, if the Smithsonian, with its 5 million, 8 million, 9 million a year, Eden Project, with its 1, Kew, with its 1.5, we add up all of these great institutions, if we were that good, how come the culture on our planet has not changed? How come politicians don't take into account what is important? Face it, we are not very good. And like children whistling to stop the crocodile biting our toes under the bed, we talk about outputs, we talk about education, we talk about the importance of our work, the importance of our research. The reason I mentioned the Sistine Chapel is I believe one of the great dangers is there's a huge opportunity if we were bolder. One of the things I would start to do would be to question the notion that we do partnerships and collaborations. Have you noticed how we use all those words? We collaborate, we partner, we do all this stuff. The old joke definition of these partnerships is people held together in mutual loathing. My God, the academic world is more poisonous even than politics. The way the professionals do this to their territory. We'll talk about collaboration, we'll do everything except collaborate. I will mention no names, but in my country, 2 or 3 of the biggest institutions spend most of their time telling you why the other ones are lousy collaborators and they won't work with them. And they've all got the same story about each other. The truth is, they should probably have half of their staff just fired. But no, we live in a world of public sector support for everything. So even the mediocre can't be fired. Even the people who aren't doing their job can't be fired. And the world of academia holds on to the right to research what it likes, because that's the name of academic freedom. Now that's great, but just imagine for a moment that by the year 2100, the world is doomed. And we, like the Venetians in the middle 1700s, wanted to argue about who had the right to park their gondola here. I think one of the brave things that we could sign up to is about being aggressively positive about what we can contribute to the world and understand storytelling. I'll come back to the horticultural part of it, but I'm very interested in storytelling. Since I met a chap, one of the most inspirational men I've ever met, a guy called Jack Sim. He set up an organization called the WTO. Not the World Trade Organization, I hasten to add, it's the World Toilet Organization. And he was having a great deal of trouble distributing toilets around the Far East into communities that needed sanitation. He kept saying, you need this for health reasons. And people wouldn't take it. Eventually, someone said to him, you need to go to Thailand and meet this guy who has revolutionized sex education in Thailand. And you will learn a lot. So he went to Thailand and he met this guy, and this guy was really interesting. This guy, for those of you who don't know Thailand, it is actually, although a bit like my home country of Holland, perceived to be very liberal, sexually and all the rest of it, that is actually an outside persona. Inside, it's actually a very conservative country. And sex education wasn't taking place at all, and the incidence of HIV was going absolutely through the roof. And this guy decided to do something very extreme. he put an advert in the newspapers and said, I want to have a drinking competition with the chief of police. If he wins, I will do anything he asks for one day. If I win, I want him to order every traffic cop in Bangkok to stand at the crossroads of all the major roads in the city, blowing up condoms and turn them into funny animals. And he drank the cop under the table, so it happened, it was on every news program, and suddenly it enabled families across Thailand to talk to each other about sex education because the taboo had been broken. He then went to these villages in Malaysia, and he walks into a village. He knew exactly what to do. He walked into a village, and he said to the first people he met, he said, I'm not sure I can bring myself to talk to a man who allows strangers to see his wife's buttocks in public. How dare you? So the guy immediately took a toilet. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he said, and while you're on it, what sort of son are you that allows your parents to go out at night and defecate at night? Because when you get older, you need to defecate in the early hours. They could get bitten by cobras. What sort of son are you? So he took another toilet. Now, the amazing thing is, when he was asked by his friends why he'd now got 2 toilets, he said he'd got them for health reasons. Now, isn't that interesting? Another story from Eden, we have one of the most inspirational guys I've ever worked with, a guy called Ian Martin, who in his later years fell hopelessly in love with the daughter of a witch doctor in Botswana, which sounds like an unlikely tale, which indeed it was. And he went to live in this village for a while, and he realized there were a lot of things that were wrong. The women were having to walk up to 7 miles to get timber for fires, and the witch doctor, who was an old man, was having to spend most of his day traveling to find the plants that he needed for his particular brand of healthcare. And Ian started to talk to people because he realized that the story of conservation wasn't going to help. There was no word for conservation in this language. But the stories he told, first of all, he said to the witch doctor, when you become a very old man, do you still not want to have your power? And if you want to have your power, would it not be sensible to grow the plants that you will need for that power near your house? Ah. So a campaign began to plant plants all around the village. And he said the same to the ladies. As you get older, you will no longer be able to walk that many miles. But in the years between now and when you are older, if we were to plant woods all around the village, there will be timber in plenty for you all. These are all good stories, aren't they? And I think one of the things that we need to do, we live in a country, for heaven's sakes, you've got John Muir, you've got Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, you've got Walt Whitman, the great writers, probably the greatest nature writers of any country in the world came from this country. So what on earth are we doing getting people who are marketeers to write the stuff for your brochures and the way you are? The writing is appalling. It is semi-literate drivel. Let's be honest, it's a punishment reading most of this stuff. The point I'm making about language and the point I'm making about the importance of botanic gardens, I mean, Eden isn't actually a botanic garden. It was kind of you to imply it was, Andy, but it's one of those things where actually if someone accuses me of it, I feel a bit insulted. We chose the word project to create a sense of ongoing life, so there was no stasis. It was something about trying things out. One of the things that really interested us was the notion that everybody talks about the impact of what they do. And have you noticed how most people who measure the impact are the same people who do it? Therefore, of course, the results are good. You know? What's very interesting, when you have a place like Eden, you can use it as a living laboratory, and you can actually get artists to do things, you can do things with your own team. And then what you've done is create something which is capable of transmission. So that's only the first bit. That's PR, if you like. The real secret is to see whether you can then get on the other side of transmission and see whether reception is taking place. It is so embarrassing for so many artists when you talk about, will you interpret X for us? And they do it, and they put it up, and you ask the public what they actually took away from it. 9 times out of 10, they haven't got a clue. And yet you've paid lots of good money for it. And then the worst thing happens, you keep it because you paid good money for it. You keep that crap on your site because you can't bear to get rid of it. Believe me, we've done it ourselves. Don't worry, I'm not trying to claim to be holier than thou. But there's a kind of weird culture that if you spent money on it, it must be good. The same culture, which is very pernicious and corrosive, that is in all our ways of living, is that we are being forced to justify the work that we do in terms of value for money. Aren't we? Almost every output you've got has got a value for money index with it. Yeah? And yet, a truly civilized place would not be talking about value for money. Great research, great thinking, developing great questions should not start from a business plan of the money you will make from them. They've got to start from an intellectual purity about the journey you're going to go on. But even then, is it worth it if the world is going to hell in a handcart? You see, I believe that if I had any influence in the world of botanic gardens, which I do not, but if I did, there's a lot I would change. There's an awful lot I would change. I would go round almost all of them and say, why do you exist? Why? What makes you think conservation is such a good idea? Tell me, baby, tell me. Because actually the logical extension of the arguments I heard this morning, and I mean this as a friend, the logical extension is, if you'd all been around 65 million years ago, we'd have a hell of a population crisis today because we'd have saved all of it. Death is part of our existence. And I think if we're going to justify the conservation argument, which I think is justified, don't get me wrong, I'm just trying to be devil's advocate, one's got to have a far stronger voicing of it than simply because I think so. Because, of course, you know the word that the world hates the most? This one. You fell for it. Have a conference on agents of change. We don't like to change. No, it's true, change. People hate the word change. You know, when you talk to people privately, change, that's really difficult. I want to talk about status as well. And I'm obviously not talking about anybody in this room, because that would be rude. We have got to grow up and realize that the great botanic gardens need to be championed by people who are terrific leaders. Really, it's a terrible problem in the world at the moment. The lack of people with the polymathic interests that can stand up on stage with people and talk about a range of subjects other than the narrow one in which they've decided to root themselves. We really do need serious leadership. We need to invest significant funds, not in preserving more plants, which we do, but actually in people to create the champions that can actually sit down with politicians and create a price. Bringing it back to money, which I didn't want to, actually one of the best ways of getting what you need, what we believe in, is making it very costly for people to disagree with you, because you are going to surface the issues and blame them. Too much of the botanic garden heritage is reactive. Today there was an interesting discourse about agriculture, wasn't there? There was a very interesting discourse, some really good talking about agriculture. What the hell happened to the botanic garden movement that agriculture was allowed to be ripped out of it in the first place? Do you not see how irrelevant we all are if economic botany and agriculture and agronomy are not right at the heart of what the botanic garden movement is? We have got to steal that territory back to where it belongs. And we need to have that. We need to have strategies where we are saying to people what we would do is. Not, our reaction to what's happening there is. It's got to be aggressively positive. It's absolutely shameful that, let's be really real, one of the things we were talking about at Exeter University, who've got a security department, is when the Brits and the Americans, whatever, went into Iraq, let's make it really real, or Afghanistan, where were the representatives of the great botanic gardens? Not as forces, but if you're actually, your culture, your civilization, your cultura is important, surely you believe that the superiority of your cause is actually served best by demonstrating that people's lives and livelihoods are made better for your actions thereafter. And we need to have some statements about that. We need to become citizens of the world, not the flotsam and jetsam on top of it that just hopes it gets a little bite of the cherry at some other point. So bravery is really, really important. And training and leadership, training for leadership is really important. We need to also upgrade the whole concept of what it is to be a botanist or horticulturist or gardener, and to stop the snotty behavior that we have within our own profession, where if you're a botanist, a gardener is somehow below you. It's true, isn't it? It's true. And that mustn't be allowed, because actually what we've got to say is, being a botanist or horticulturist, a landscape architect, these are all about health and well-being and about the fecundity of the soil. They're about building of communities. There's a much bigger story about meaning and belonging that goes with all of those things than actually the petty definitions between being a gardener or an agronomist. We've got to defeat that. And we've got to train people. Most young people coming out of horticultural colleges or out of university even are so ill-trained to do the jobs that they're meant to be doing or could be doing. And also the career paths are so narrowed that most of the people of the culture that we would like to be coming into our profession don't immediately embrace it because they don't see where their career is going to go. We need to help them to realize that you can be entrepreneurial, you can be cultural, you can actually be creative and artistic, and there are careers that will pay you quite a lot of money as well as enabling you to satisfy your soul and contribute back to the community you're in. But that is not the case, I believe, in America or Britain. And this is where collaboration is really important. If we could actually collaborate really properly, exchanging like they used to do in the Victorian days, people from garden to garden, to create a sense of excellence and a leadership trajectory that enables people to have real ambition behind that, we could start to make a very big difference. But that all depends on whether you believe what I said about the Sistine Chapel, whether we're living at a time where we're going to have the bravery to do something, or are we just going to be passive and hope that by persuading people with some money, we can just keep on doing same old, same old, same old, but bigger. It's our call, isn't it? I don't know what you think. How many people in this room agree with that sentence? That we need to be braver and we need to create a professional presence that makes people respect the profession we're all engaged in. Come on, who agrees? Okay. I'm glad we're on the same team. 80%. Right, I want to speak to 20% later. Botanic gardens have given me an enormous excitement and frustration all at the same time. There is another aspect to this, going back to communication and the digital world. Most of what comes out of botanic gardens in the digital world is so dull. It's so dull. How many people here have been to Terra Botanica near Angers in France? I went recently, and it's not got everything right, but it's got some things right. Crikey, you go in and they have this induction place with a bloke that's just like your favorite uncle, so whispering, I want to tell you a bit about plants. Some real cool stuff about plants. He's got a voice like that. Yeah. And I've never seen anything like it. Hundreds of people are pouring into this concrete building, and they've got a huge piece of sacking, you know, the sort of stuff you use in a Victorian garden, but just sewn together. And they're doing this like what looked like black and white flickery films with subtitles. And it was really funny. And you know what? It was really informative. It made earthworms feel really cool. It made mosses and lichens feel as if you were being introduced to aliens and that you were really stupid for not knowing all this stuff. And then as you walked out of this place, you walked into this huge garden with a sense of a world opened up for you that you never suspected was there. The problem with a lot of what we do in our botanic gardens is it feels like you're a contestant on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You walk down something and you're somewhere and it says, did you know? And there's some completely bizarre fact, you know, cinchona helps against malaria or something, you know, or I'm making it up, it could be one of them. And you walk past and you go, that was interesting. And then chocolate, we all love chocolate, and it comes from this, and then the Latin at the end of it. It's just utter rubbish. There's no thematic. Without plants, there's no life on Earth. And guys, people who don't know about plants and don't know how to cultivate them and don't understand to eat are not civilized. That's part of our brand. Our brand has got to be, if you don't know this cool stuff, you are not culturé. Yeah? We need to be harnessing, I'm talking to a non-British audience, but we need to be positively targeting people like David Beckham, the footballer, you know, or Bono, or whatever. Cultural icons who can be turned to find what we do cool in such a way that the brand of what we do is seen as being led by people who are full of soul, who've got a sense of direction. That's why I wanted to speak here, because I knew I was going to be amongst friends. The digital world is the thing I wanted to end on. It isn't, actually. I wanted to talk about live human sacrifice amongst the Aztecs. I've suddenly remembered. But we'll stay with the digital world for just one moment. The money model, many of our botanic gardens are stunning. Absolutely stunning. I mean, Gay, who works at Kew, will be talking about Kew later. But the weirdest thing is, you know, at Eden and at Kew and Edinburgh and whatever, you come to Eden or Kew and come ice skating. Come and hunt for Easter eggs. Let's have a theory about picnics. Everything, let's do everything in these wonderful places except recognize some of the greatest plants the planet has ever produced are in this place, and actually, by the way, a lot of people died putting them here. Treasure them. It's like we've lost our confidence in the things we love and almost want to point at the other things all around them that are peripheral. So I just wanted to say that, have confidence in that what we do is genuinely awesome. And I just wanted to end with live human sacrifice amongst the Aztecs. Because the greatest disappointment of my life was when I took a whole group of kids, when I did the Lost Gardens of Heligan. I restored a garden in Cornwall, and they found me not funny at all. It was one of the most dispiriting, hateful things. 3 days I was going to be with them, and at the end of the second night, I was considering pulling a sickie on myself because they hated me. That night, I read a Roald Dahl story. And the following morning, I came in and I was faced with 60 children who looked ready and terrorizing to destroy my life. And I knew what to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I knew instinctively, no more Mr. Nice Guy. I sneered. And I fixed them with a stare, and I said, I'm going to tell you about poison. I'm going to tell you about a poison that's going to burn through your stomach lining, and you are going to slowly drip, drip, drip to death. Respect. They were mine. Warming to my task, I immediately started, without looking at the teachers, who I understood were quite alarmed, I started talking to them about the live human sacrifice amongst the Aztecs and the drugs that had been invented by the Aztecs to stop these human sacrifices, screaming as their still pumping hearts were being cut from the chest cavity, ripped out by the ventricles, and held up to celebrate the summer solstice as they were drenched in blood. These kids were mine. They never dreamt that plants could be that exciting, ladies and gentlemen. After that, even the potato had developed a mystique beyond imagining. So let us salute the art of storytelling and pledge ourselves to being bolder, braver, dare to be relevant, and remember always that we've got the coolest quality of all. We have culture. Thank you.
Questions from the floor, please.
What did you say?
We don't dare.
Well.
Oh, there's a question over there.
It would seem to me that a good start might be having a film akin to Al Gore's.
Now there's a double. I shall take that in the complimentary sense. Well, I think your instinct is right. I think that if we were to have a film on the lines of Al Gore, it would have to be brilliantly scripted, a la Hollywood, and it would need some younger people. I'm an old fart. I turned 60 this week. Do you know how depressing that is? Oh. Yeah, but I think you're right. If we could actually find some younger champions, we should collectively, collaboratively, start scripting the sort of thing we think should be important in bite-sized chunks. The other thing that I meant to say, may I just say?
Carry on, yes.
It's about community. When we had that excellent first panel meeting talking about conservation, whatever, there was a sense in me as I watched it of, crikey, the world is a big place, and actually we're not going to make much of a difference doing it that way. And I've got a feeling that part of the narrative has got to be to, I use the word agency simply because I can't stand the word enabled or empowered because it's been so misused, to create communities around the world where you're basically saying that our expertise is to identify that which needs to be saved, but we actually make it the responsibility of the people who live there. And again, with this culture type argument, if you can turn it round, that actually a community that lets go of some of this belonging to a place, it's their fault, and then let them die. We do infantilize people, don't we? We do actually expect we're going to do everything for everybody, as opposed to saying, just putting the spotlight of responsibility on people to look out for that which is in their own neighborhoods and create a kind of tension about that. So that's what I want to say about that.
That's great. Any more questions?
This is, I guess, something out of sort of ignorance but curiosity when you mentioned David Beckham and somebody with influence, and I mean, how important could that be to something of an organization? You know, many actors support nonprofits or animal shelters or rescues. Is that something that's worth investigating?
One of the things about celebrities, it's a bit like at Eden we do a lot of rock concerts, and we did Live 8 as well with Peter Gabriel for the Africa version, is there is something a bit dangerous about using celebrities in terms of the way it can trivialize. I was thinking more in terms of catching famous people doing this stuff and getting engaged in the stuff that excites us, to demonstrate that actually we're not strange people, we're just people who happen to have a sense of the interconnectedness of all things. Because I think that's kind of what we all are. We understand that, and we somehow don't get the language right, but that's what we mean. So I would see us weaving a number of celebrities from each country that, you know, I think it's quite difficult to become so Anglo-Saxon as I just was. But I think if we can create a culture around that, that could be very, very powerful, especially if we all work on it as a gang.